Hello everyone, Iris France here. Today we're going to continue to talk about our aggregate expenditure model. In this clip, we're going to talk about the equilibrium. In this model, real GDP is our output and the aggregate expenditure is our spending, which includes consumption, investment, government spending, and net export. Here's the bottom line. If our aggregate expenditure is greater than the output, that means the economy does not produce enough stuff to sell. If our output, our real GDP, is greater than our aggregate expenditure, that means, hey, we're producing too much and inventories will accumulate. Now recall our diagram where the aggregate expenditure is on the vertical axis and real GDP, our output, is on the horizontal axis. Also recall the 45-degree line. On this 45-degree line, it tells us that our aggregate expenditure is equal to the output. Now adding the consumption schedule, remember our consumption is increasing in the real GDP, and therefore our consumption schedule is here. It is positively sloped. Now adding our investment schedule, remember our investment is independent of GDP, and therefore our investment schedule is a horizontal line here. Now we're adding investment on the top of consumption. On the previous slide, you saw that the investment schedule is a horizontal line, and therefore adding investment to consumption is going to cause the aggregate expenditure curve to shift up. Here is the government spending schedule. Remember, the government spending is determined by our Congress, so it is also independent from the real GDP, and as a result, you see a horizontal line here. Now we're going to add the government spending on the top of our consumption and investment. So because the government spending is also independent of GDP, which is a horizontal line, and therefore when you add government spending on the top of consumption and investment, you're going to see your aggregate expenditure curve shift up again. Here is our net export. Remember, our net export is also independent of the real GDP, and our net export is negative because our imports are greater than our exports. Finally, we're going to add our net export on the top of our consumption, investment, and government spending. Remember that our net export is negative, and therefore it's going to drag down your aggregate expenditure schedule a little bit, going down. And therefore, we'll end with the red line. So here is our final aggregate expenditure schedule. Here we put our aggregate expenditure schedule together with our 45-degree line. At the intersection, you will find equilibrium, where the aggregate expenditure is exactly equal to the real GDP. That's why we call that AEE and YE. E stands for equilibrium, meaning in this economy, we are producing exactly the right amount of stuff for spending. Next, we're going to talk about what happens if our economy is not in equilibrium. What kind of adjustments are we going to see? Now, suppose our economy starts with this equilibrium point, this purple point, where the aggregate expenditure is equal to AE1, and our real GDP, our output, is equal to Y1. So aggregate expenditure is higher than output, meaning our firms will be running out of inventories. To respond, the firms will try to produce more, so our output is going to increase from Y1 to Y2. Now, when the firms are producing more, they are also hiring more workers, meaning these workers will be able to get a bigger paycheck and spend the paycheck. So our consumption is going to increase. As a result, our aggregate expenditure is going to go up from AE1 to AE2. So now we're at this baby blue point. But then at this baby blue point, we are again in a disequilibrium, meaning the firms will be running out of inventory to sell because, hey, AE2 is still higher than Y2, so firms are running out of inventories. So the firms will again try to produce more, And therefore, our output is going to go up from Y2 to Y3. When the firms are producing more, that means, again, they are hiring more workers who are going to spend their bigger paycheck. So our aggregate expenditure is going to go up again. And this process is going to continue until we hit equilibrium point, point E, where our aggregate expenditure is exactly equal to our real GDP. Now, what happens if our economy started with disequilibrium, where our output is greater than aggregate expenditure? Now, suppose our output is at point Y4 and our aggregate expenditure is AE4. That means the output is higher than aggregate expenditure. As a result, firms will have a lot of inventories accumulated that they are unable to sell. So to respond, the firms will try to cut their production, so the output is going to go down from Y4 to Y5. When the output goes down, that means the firms must have let go several workers. Say, hey, I'm not producing that much, so you don't have to come to work from tomorrow. And therefore, these workers will have a smaller paycheck, and as a result, they are going to cut their consumption. So as a result, your aggregate expenditure is going to go down from AE4 to AE5. But at this baby blue point, where our aggregate expenditure is AE5 and our output is equal to Y5, you're still not at 45-degree line, meaning you're still having a disequilibrium where we have more output than aggregate expenditure. So again, firms will have too much inventories accumulated. So firms will respond by cutting their output. So our output is going to go down from Y5 to Y6. And when the firms are cutting their production, that means some workers are let go. And these workers are let go have a smaller paycheck. They will have to again cut their consumption. So this process is going to continue until we hit the equilibrium point, point E, where there's an intersection between the 45-degree line and the aggregate expenditure schedule.